Welcome, friends. It's so nice to be together on this Sunday evening, or morning, or afternoon, depending on where you are. And we're so happy to be here with our friends from Telehelp Ukraine to learn a little bit more about the organization that they started this year to provide telehealth services to Ukrainians. And how the SE community might be part of this. I want to give two notes right up front. I know for sure that to provide mental health services at the moment, you must be licensed in your home country with an active license of a medical doctor, a psychologist, or a social worker. And Saul will explain why this is. If you are not, there are other ways that you can still volunteer. And I believe that they still have English as the primary language for their interpreters. So you would also need to be able to provide services in English. So I just want to put that right up front for anybody watching the recording. And Saul will get into explaining more about that and more about the background. But she's going to do a 15 to 20 minute, very brief overview. And then we'll open the floor for Q&A for as long as you have questions. Does anybody have a comment or a question before we jump into her presentation to help set the stage? No? Okay, so we will be recording, but I think I could be wrong, but I think the only faces on the recording will be those of us who are spotlighted and speaking. So if you don't want your face on the recording, which we'll publish to our YouTube channel, you could turn your camera off when it comes time if you have a question to ask. But otherwise, if you're comfortable, we'd love to see your beautiful faces so we can co-regulate for a little bit together today. Okay, Saul, I hand the floor to you. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, and you're going to explain. I had a little thing written up for who you are, but you're going to explain, so go right ahead.
Well, thank you so much to the SE community for having us today here. We've been admiring all the work that you're doing for the Ukrainian communities already, and we've been in communications with Melissa and others from your team on finding the spaces that we can best support each other and work together to be the second front line to this war, as frankly, Ukrainians often describe the medical providers and mental health providers. So my name's Saul, Solomia for long, and I am a medical student at Stanford, also executive director for Telehelp Ukraine. And we also have Kwan here, is also a medical student here, and she is our director of provider outreach. Kwan, if you wanted to say hi briefly before I start sharing.
Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we just have a very short presentation. We hope to spend most of this time today answering your questions and having a conversation, but hopefully a couple slides here will just get us started and on the same page. All right. So if I can have a thumbs up if my slides are visible, okay? Excellent. So the name of our organization is Telehelp Ukraine. And we started functioning in April of this year as a response to the large-scale invasion of Ukraine under a larger umbrella of the mission of how to mobilize as many providers as we can all around the world to support the growing unmet need for medical and mental health services in Ukrainian communities. What we do since we saw our first patient in April is to provide free and also high quality medical and mental health support to Ukrainians that are most affected by the war through telemedicine services by utilizing a network of volunteer providers, clinicians, interpreters, and with a specific focus on patient advocacy as well as care coordination. So this is what our workflow looks like. So usually our patients learn about us through social media, through traditional media, through friends and family, other volunteer organizations and humanitarian organizations that we work with. And when they do, they can make an appointment with any of our medical and mental health providers on our website. When that happens, they often also send any previous medical records through our medical translators that will be translated into English and provided to the clinician for review before the appointment. Then patients join the appointment that is at the scheduled time. And currently we provide these kind of three big categories of services, which is primary care, mental health, and specialty consultations. We provide a medical interpreter for any appointment where the provider doesn't speak the local languages as a default. And all of our, as Melissa said, all of our interpreters are currently speak English. So unfortunately, we do need providers who speak English for this model to work, at least at the current state. And then after the visit, we send the patient, we ask all of the providers to write a recommendation kind of in the second person as if they would write it to the patient. We translate that and send that to the patient to help guide their next steps in their care. And then the key team member in this whole workflow are volunteers who we call health navigators. So these are people who speak the local languages and are often have a pretty good understanding of the local culture as well as the resources available. They're still mostly in the US. Some of them are in Ukraine, some of them are in other countries. But these are volunteers that will help patients sign up for the appointment if patients are having any difficulty with our website or with their internet locally or any issues that can come up. Also with all the process of submitting documents beforehand, health navigators are very helpful there. With next steps in their care they also help patients join the appointments. If they usually join 10 minutes before, kind of do a little check-in, make sure everything's working, if we're okay, if we're struggling, if we need to trigger plan Bs and so on. And then the follow-up care is also very much coordinated by health navigators, especially since most of our patients come back for at least one repeat visit. Our mental health patients come back for 6, 7, 8 visits. We've have several patients that are now returning for, a regular therapy services, at least every 2 or 3 weeks or so. And health navigators have coordinate all of this, so it doesn't fall on our providers. Our providers just need to kind of give availability and attend their appointments and provide the follow-up notes, but otherwise all this coordination is done by our volunteers. So here is what we've achieved so far. So we just passed about 300 video visits last week. It's probably a little bit more now. And as you can see, mental health is actually the biggest fraction of all three. And that has been consistently throughout. Part of that is because patients come back for more appointments than general medicine and specialty, but also we also see mental health appointments book sooner and more readily and be utilized almost to 100% capacity of our capacity, as opposed to our medical services and special medical services that are much lower than that. This is the number of appointments through the months that we've been operating. This map of Ukraine actually doesn't show where our patients are because we don't ask where our patients are. We can only track website traffic. But even so, what you can see that's very evident is that, so if you're unfamiliar with the map of Ukraine, these are the areas that are currently occupied, or at least partly occupied. You can see that there is a big spike here in like the closest to the front line. This is the city of Dnipro is here, city of Kharkiv is here. Then there's sort of another second front line, if you will, Kyiv and Vinnytsia, so kind of sort of where a little bit further where the refugees or internally displaced persons would go. And then Lviv Oblast is another hot spot where a lot of refugees also go if they're seeking safety from the occupied or pre-frontline areas. We currently have permission to operate in Ukraine and in Poland. So Ukrainian Ministry of Health has permitted all healthcare providers from other countries to provide care to Ukrainians in Ukraine without being licensed in Ukraine. This is an emergency authorizations that we've been able to receive early in April, which had allowed us to operate since. And we also have a permission to work with patients in Poland as well. So those are the two patients the two categories of patients that we can handle. Sometimes we do get patients from other places, which is very unfortunate and is really the hardest part for us when we know we have services we can offer. We know they need our services, but to not put our providers at risk, we unfortunately have to turn those patients away and offer other services that patients could consider or investigate. But that's also in large part handled by our volunteers. So most of the time our providers don't have to deal with that. As I mentioned earlier, most of our patients learn from us through social media or traditional media. We do a lot of outreach to local TV stations, local newspapers, radio stations. We do interviews there to try to talk about our services, to make patients aware. And there's some degree of natural growth as well through friends, family, and kind of traditional networks that we're also starting to appreciate. And so, let me go back forward instead. And we also started to collect feedback from our patients about how we're doing. And unsurprisingly, since all of our providers are incredible, our patients are very satisfied with the services they received. Most of the time they report their health concerns either partially or completely addressed during the visit. Interestingly, the trend that we're starting to see that in medical services, there's a higher fraction of concerns completely addressed than in mental health, which is why we're encouraging providers to continue offer follow-up services and continue kind of the bringing patients back for a lot more longitudinal services, since it's very unlikely that mental health concerns can be addressed in one visit completely. Most patients say that they would also recommend our services to their friends and family. And there's a little bit of here in the bottom of like satisfaction with our technical processes of signing up for the appointment, joining the call, audio, video quality, as well as quality of interpretation. And majority of patients report being extremely satisfied with these elements of our service. And this brings me to our most important slide, really, is the reason why we're speaking to your team here, is that the need for mental health services is something we discovered very early on and had always been struggling to fully address. Every time when we kind of hit a bigger wave of patient outreach and we reach more patients, more recently reached the city of Mariupol through their local city bot that a lot of the people that have previously lived there and had been displaced, or actually even some that still do live there, we've been able to reach those. And every time when we have a big wave of patient flow, our medical service is doing well. We have a nice kind of a backup of providers that we're always doing okay. Our mental health services are booked for 3 weeks in advance, and we're asking our providers to give us a little bit more time, or give us a little bit of time in the future that we can book these patients way ahead of time. And that's always been kind of the motivation for us continuing to do outreach to other mental health providers and professional communities and such. So a lot of what we see, a lot of the common concerns that we see is definitely processing emotions and kind of processing, adapting, coping and adapting to new lives that people are facing. It's processing what happened to them, but also adapting to a very strange new realities. Ukraine is a society that is still learning to accept mental health overall, and especially or specifically to seek it when probably many more patients would be classified as needing those services, but probably wouldn't be looking for them. So there's still a lot of mental health education to be done that a lot of other organizations are working towards, but especially going into these areas that are most heavily impacted, we do see a lot of people that are ready to, that have never seen a mental health provider, but in the wake of their recent experiences are giving it a try and seeing if that would help them or their families. We see a lot of need for caregiver support, as a lot, especially in the regions that are most impacted. People that are still there are usually those that can't move, or because of health issues or because of accessibility issues and other. And most of the time it's actually their caregivers are the ones that reached out to us for help, both for them and their families, because suddenly, in addition to how hard it is always to be a caregiver, now in these new circumstances with such limited access to all other services, their job has just become exponentially harder. And that's not necessarily they're not always aware that they need to seek help for themselves as well as their own. So we often have a caregiver that would make an appointment for their mother or a child to deal with their health issues, and halfway into the conversation we discover that actually you might want, if you'd like, to do another appointment for yourself, just so that we can unpack these issues a little bit more. And generally, a lot of what we see is anxiety disorders, panic disorders, there's some degree of depression as well, that for a lot of, there's some patients that have struggled with these before that have just been exacerbated by the war and the trauma, but there are also some that are very new from living under 2 weeks of shelling, or living with their sleep constantly disrupted by the air raids, that are just sort of compound effect is now had triggered new development of new mental health issues. So as I mentioned, about 40% of our visits are mental health. So that has been a continued need throughout, and it stays as such. Almost 100% of them of our appointments are booked. Also booked way ahead, especially when we have a new wave of patient flow. Currently, we have recruited psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers that are required to be licensed in their country of practice according to the licensing standards of that country. And we have a workflow to verify that, and we can help providers through that as well. We're exploring additional options to recruit therapists and coaches and other providers a little bit more. That's not quite in place yet because there isn't a very good equivalent in Ukraine that we can communicate to patients about what is the nature of these services so that those expectations are clear. But it's something that we're working towards, and not just as another avenue for fulfilling this continued mental health need. That's also a part of why we're reaching out to your organization, knowing that you have a wide network of providers with very different backgrounds and very different expertise and skills. And having a very committed network of volunteers also helps us coordinate a lot of sort of interspecialty internal referrals, where we, as needed, based on that discussions that take place during that first appointment, we can redirect the patients internally to services that would better fit their needs. And there are a couple other supplementary slides about just us as an organization, but we can probably go to those if we need to. But I would also, I think it might be good to stop here and go to questions if there are some.
I'll open the floor. You can put something in the chat or raise your hand icon. Hi, Michelle. It's nice to see you. Are you speaking? I can't hear you.
There we
yet.
go. Hi,
There
sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Soloway. I'm chair of the board of SEI. Really happy to be here. Really excited. I mean, the work you're doing is just so amazing. And you really answered my question, because I was wondering what is the role for people who are not licensed clinical providers, and what you might need from us to help shepherd that process through. Do you have a sense of how we can help, how we can be of service here to help you move that along? Because there are many people in our community who are, they come from a bodywork tradition, such as myself. That's where I come from. Also coaching. I'm also a coach, but there's many others. We have lawyers, we have, we don't limit who can take our programs. And so I'm just wondering what we can do standard wise or guideline wise, if there's anything we can do. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
So I'll start with some thoughts and then go to Kwan. I think from an organizational standpoint, I think what we may need your help with is if we were to recruit this kind of larger, broader community of providers, we would need help or guidance through ensuring because it's not necessarily something, so like if it's a psychiatrist, we can usually look up NPI number and we know that this provider is licensed and trained according to those standards. So that's something that we would be unfamiliar with to do with the providers that are part of your community. So just help, making sure that everyone who is participating in their capacity within their training, and also probably even more importantly, help with how do we communicate to patients what this is, what is the service to patients, as well as other providers that might internally refer the patients to, because it's probably, we don't necessarily need to have, if the patient comes in once, sees a psychiatrist, their medication is more or less, readjusted, the medication's working, there are no major side effects, but the patient might need continuous support. That doesn't have to happen by a psychiatrist. That can happen with a variety of other providers. But so that the psychiatrist knows, what is the specifics of the training and the expertise of these different providers. And also if the patients were to sign up for these providers themselves, so that they understand what this is and if this fits their needs.
So if I could just ask you a follow-up question, I know there are other people who want to ask questions. So SEI has a database of people who are certified in SEP. Would they need other qualifications? Because like I know massage therapists, there's a national registry and there's also a state, it's licensed at the state level. But if you just haven't someone who's just an SEP, would that be sufficient just to contact our organization? Or if we, had that list, and then our problem is we're not a standalone profession yet, up until now. We're working on it. So for licensure, they work under their current scope of practice. And so for body, so anyway, I'm happy to help. We can talk offline in any way I can. I think we'll let's discuss a little bit more. Generally, what we're, at least the requirement that's imposed on us by the Ministry of Health is that we have to maintain the same standards that we would in any other country that these provide. So for instance, if it's sufficient for one of your providers to just be verified by your vetted by your organization for them to provide care, independently or as part of another practice, that should, in theory, satisfy the requirement that we are supposed to abide by. Okay, thank you so much.
And I just ask a follow-up, Michelle, because in the United States, my understanding is this is a little bit difficult too, because there's state by state, the laws differ too, right? So some SEPs might be licensed under some type of state approved licensure, but then if they move to another state, they might not be able to register there. Is
that's true? So people there's a national, like in massage, there's a national organization that pretty much permits anybody to, you can go to any state with that and just pay the administrative fee and get licensed. But if you're going state by state, they do have different requirements. But also it's a little bit tricky because somatic work is kind of in the kind of a gray fuzzy area, and we've been having some problems in a couple of different states with people doing it under a bodywork scope of practice, and they're getting creamed for it. They're like, cease and desist. And so, we're sort of battling on that front too. So it's a little wonky, but what SEI does is it certifies, it gives a certificate to people who've gone through the program, met the qualifications. And, we're looking at having maybe more rigorous standards and, actual testing and evaluation, which we don't have in place right now. So it's a little fuzzy, I think, maybe from your perspective, for what like a minister of health would kind of want a little more, evidence and sort of stricter requirements. So
to be continued, though.
To be continued, yeah.
Definitely
But
keep the conversation going.
yeah.
I cut you off.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Kendra, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Kendra, and I'm a clinical social worker in Nebraska. And the question I have that I'm not sure if you can answer, but because my licensure is for the state of Nebraska, I can't practice in other states without being licensed there. So I'm wondering if do I need to contact the Department of Health in the state of Nebraska? And, what kind of ramifications are there for, I'm not only practicing outside the state, but I'm practicing outside the country. So does the emergency edict standing that the Minister of Health in Ukraine has decreed, does that sort of translate here? Does that make sense?
So you actually would never work in the United States as part of with patients in the United States as part of our organization. That's part of what we work the hardest, is to make sure that patients that are in the United States wouldn't be permitted, because that's the highest risk for our providers if they were to practice in another state. Okay. You would only be working with patients that are in Ukraine, okay, which is where you're
in another country, just not another state.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Okay. Good to know. Yes. That's helpful. Great.
And it's that's not a general rule. It's just currently you are allowed to practice in Ukraine because Ukrainian Ministry of Health has permitted you to do so. Okay. But the state of Nevada probably hasn't. So that's why you're not permitted there. But that's the same way we're not permitted to help patients in Italy or in Germany or in any of those other European countries.
Okay, great. Thank you. Very helpful.
I'm curious if anyone in the room has already tried to go through the registration process with Telehelp Ukraine and what that was like for you. Anybody?
Yeah.
Andrea, how do I pronounce your name?
Andrea.
Yeah.
I intended to register, and then I learned, as you said again here, that you need a license for psychiatry or psychotherapy, and I don't. I'm a SE practitioner and originally a body worker, and I can integrate the SE work in the body work. And so I doubted for myself if I'm the right person for this, because I'm also not so used to do sessions in the internet. And but I would be ready to do it, to give sessions on with the internet, SE sessions, but as I see, it's probably not appropriate in the moment, but maybe later, if you find a solution for those who are not registered, I would be ready.
That is really good to hear. Thank you for offering your services. We would usually what we're saying right now, just based on the restrictions that we're hearing from the Minister of Health in Ukraine, is that those 3 particular practices are able to give mental health services through our platform. However, we would continue the conversation and try to build and expand our services. We would, of course, need to consult our legal. We have a firm that gives us pro bono legal consultation. So we'll have to ask them, we have to ask our faculty advisors, and I would imagine it'd be really helpful if we can have, like as Telehelp Ukraine, have like an emotional support hotline or group that's not necessarily a mental health appointment, but still somebody for the patients to talk to in case they need more services and there's no appointments available. And I would see SE providers fitting that niche really well. But it's just conversations that we'll just have to continue to have with our faculty advisors and our legal counsel.
Okay.
And this is solely for the protection of the provider. Because we don't want to we don't want any, we're putting a lot of measures to make sure providers are fully protected against malpractice. We have patients signing a disclosure form. We have the Minister of Health already giving approval, and we always counsel the legal firm to make sure that everything we're doing is within the realm that's legal.
Andrea,
Okay, I wish you good luck.
Andrea, I wanted to let you know, and anybody that watches the recording after too, that, you know, the SC task force has a volunteer sheet that I think Zlata can put it in the chat box for everybody, where we've invited SCPs to put your name on the registry if you'd be willing to provide up to 5 free sessions for an individual client, and then they can contact you directly to set that up. But the weakness of our program is we don't have the interpreters that Saul and Kwan have. So yeah, it's a real limitation of, it's just amazing what they've been able to put together, not only with recruiting all of these providers, but also a whole host of interpreters who make this possible too. So just so that you and others know, in the SE community, we have tried to organize ourselves a little bit to at least make SCP services available. But
and Andrea, I'll also like to add, within our organizations, we have the providers, but then we also have like CS people, we have lawyers, we have
Kwan, what's CS? Sorry.
Computer science. They're the ones like revamping our technical services and making and automizing things so that we can more streamline the process and increase our capacity to take on more patients. So we have different roles that volunteers can participate in. If you sign up through the general volunteer form, we can match you with something that would be helpful to participate in as well. Because we'd love to, for people who are willing to support, we'd love to have you part of the team.
Okay.
Yeah, the health navigator role sounds very interesting to me. Liana, I see your hand.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you all. I just wanted to share that I in fact went through the process, so I signed up and as I'm providing SE, somatic experiencing sessions, but under the umbrella of being a registered in the Register of Psychologists in Italy. So just wanted to share that the process was quite smooth, the registration, and I was supposed to have the first session earlier this week, but then a person didn't show up. But it was very nice to find there the interpreter and the space holder, like a person who is there to make sure that we can in fact meet up there. So it was also an opportunity to ask just few questions about the timings, because time zones are different between US and Ukraine. And so it was very very nice to be there in a space where something is created, like being together and welcoming people in a nice space. So thank you for creating this, Sol and Juan and everybody that is with you in this project. Happy to be part of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's good to hear. It also brings up an important point that I'd like to emphasize to all providers, and that is that we are providing services to people who are affected by war, and sometimes, you know, their medical appointments aren't always on the top of their mind, and sometimes patients do not, like, they don't show up, and we feel bad because the providers have graciously offered their time, but we also want to remind to give some grace to the patients, which providers have been doing because of their particular situation that they're in.
Do you have statistics on your no-show rates?
So
It's
do you
about-
have?
Yeah, it's about 25%, which is still quite high for us. We're aiming to take that down as much as we can. But there's some elements of just regular no-show where people have forgotten or something came up, or they misunderstood their time or confused the time, and there's a fraction that there's an error rate, I have to go into my basement, or my internet is turned off because I'm in the occupied territory. And that's this is part of what the health navigators are meant to do, this is why we try to have them, they usually connect with the patient beforehand, like, are you here, are you going to be able to join, so that we can kind of give the provider a heads up, or like, this isn't going to happen, you know, they can't join today, please reorganize your days, you know, so that you can use that time differently. But there's always just unforeseen circumstances that that are outside of our control. And if the patient just doesn't respond at all and they're not online, we don't see them online at all, then sadly, that is outside of our control. But what we do have is, what our providers found reassuring, is that we, the patients that are no shows are like our highest focused in terms of follow-up, to make sure that this is the main priority for all of our volunteers, is to get through to the patients that didn't show up, find out what happened, and make sure to bring them back. So we're not letting them just sort of get lost in a vacuum of forgotten patients, but we make sure to do all we can to make sure that they get the services they need at another time.
I have a question about messaging to patients about the different type. There's so many different types of mental health services offered. And so before they come to appointment, would they know that this is a body-oriented approach, or this person is licensed in this particular type of therapy? And do they have the ability to choose the type of mental health therapy that interests them the most?
So we have the ability to do that. So right now, if the patients were to sign up, the way we have it set it up is that they can choose between a mental health provider with a psychologist, psychiatrist, and what right now is still a work in progress, but right now we just call it other mental health workers, for which currently are licensed therapists or licensed social workers. And potentially body workers would go under that, or we can also make it a separate another appointment type. Then under that, there's a little descriptor for what that is. And this is where we would have to work very closely to make sure we communicate that as precisely as possible, and also as accessible to patients as possible. So the tricky part of that is that patients are very familiar with who psychologists are. They're also more or less familiar with who psychiatrists are. There's a greater stigma against psychiatry than psychology. So our psychologists actually get most of their appointments booked, even though they probably provide more or less the same services, sometimes very similar services to what a therapist or social worker would provide. But just because patients are not familiar with what those other providers are and how they work, they might overlook that third category or fourth category and just go straight for psychology. So this is another place where we just have to really probably learn from you how to best educate patients on what this is and how to use it, and kind of promote it more to them, both by other providers and also directly to the patients.
Michelle, I feel like that's another area where you could help us think through, you know, is body psychotherapy an appropriate category, or kind of where does SE fall?
Yeah, there is a whole association, national association on body psychotherapy. So yeah, I mean, it's accepted and there's a fight about it. Because all of a sudden the American Psychological Association wants to separate the mind and the body and say that, no, we only deal with the mind, we don't deal with the body. So it's a little crazy. We're sort of in flux about it, but yeah, I mean, there is the Association of Body Psychotherapy, which is very well established, and that is a whole world. And the somatics therapies are just taking off.
Yeah.
I mean, I think everybody is starting to recognize that, you can't really address mental health issues without being body centered. So
yeah,
hopefully, I mean, if there's there's pushes in both directions.
Yeah.
So we're living in crazy times.
Yeah, there seems to be a new understanding that the body keeps the score, to quote our friend Bessel van der Kolk.
Exactly. But I'm happy to help work through those areas. And I know people who we could, get involved, hook up with this effort to see, who would know more about the logistics and licensing.
Thank you. And Saul, one more question about that. Do patients see the bio of the individual provider, or they're just selecting the type of provider?
They can see either. It's not, so currently we're using our telemedicine platform. We're using an existing solution that has been wonderful for us because we could get started right away, but also has some limitations that we kind of have to work around. So patients can see the individual provider. It's just not terribly intuitive. So this is where our volunteers would come in to help through that. We also have a team of engineers that are building our own front end to the solution, so that we can kind of adjust it a little bit better so that those bios are a little bit more visible. That said, we are very understanding that this is a work in a zone of crisis, and you might be working with patients in occupied territory, you might be working with a patient close to front lines. So we, as a default, we don't ask providers to list their entire specific personal details. We actually even don't list last names usually, unless provider wants to do so. We just ask for kind of general concepts of just more of explaining, but in a sense of bio, what we ask for is more the type of services that you're feel comfortable providing, rather than necessarily institutions that you attended and so on. Sorry, we
this is
I'm sorry, I saw Sol on the screen and I was like, I have to say hi.
this is Zoe. She's our director of technology.
Hi Sol, I can't hear you because
that's okay. So if anyone
Stanford has a power outage, so a lot of Stanford graduate students are at this cafe.
And I'm at a cafe too, because I have a nanny at home watching my son on a Sunday afternoon. So thank you everyone for your forbearance with our situations here. You guys, I have so many questions. I'm going to do a strategic pause because I don't want to override the questions of others in the room. Does anybody have something? Andriana, it's nice to see you again. And then Ava after Andriana.
Oh, hi, nice to see you too. Thank you guys for all your work. I just have a question about other mental health workers. I'm actually a registered psychotherapist, but before becoming a registered psychotherapist, I'm a registered nurse as well. I work in Canada as an RN, plus I do private practice, and I do see clients in Ukraine as a volunteer. Other mental health providers, I'm wondering, I know you don't specify, you only specify medical doctor, psychologist, and social worker. Would RNs be under this? Because I know therapy is a little bit of a gray world, but how about RN, registered nurse?
This is another question that we struggled with a lot, is how to incorporate other medical workers, including physician assistants, including nurse practitioners, and so on. And sadly, we don't quite have a good answer just yet, mainly because so our current workflow is somewhat difficult enough with just having one provider that is practicing independently, and we're adding an interpreter and a health navigator to that, and a patient. So this is already 4 people that we're trying to get together at the same time, same place, different time zones, different places, unstable internet. So all of this is already kind of a house of cards that we're trying to keep up. If we trying to, because of how differently RNs and NPs and PAs are practicing in different states, there is an usually a standard of some degree of supervision by an MD provider that for us would be hard to accomplish, because it would either have to be asynchronously, or we would have to bring a 5th person into the room at the same time. And we just haven't quite figured out the best way to do that. That said, there are a lot of other kind of supporting roles that we think RNs can be really helpful with, especially those, and I know this is a very limited pool, but those that speak local languages, like translation of documents. Currently, that is done in part by medical students, in part by other RNs or other kind of health workers that have the knowledge of the medical vocabulary in both languages. Interpretation is also another great place to use those skills. But even for those, what we're thinking about, and this is not quite working just yet very well, but there are some patients that our volunteers are uncertain about if they should go to a specialist right away, they should go to a generalist first or family doctor first. And sometimes this is where like a triage person that might be helpful to just look over the information that we have on that patient and give us a little bit of guidance to where the patient should go. And I'm kind of giving a very vague answer because we sort of try to put this together. It sort of worked, but also other things worked maybe a little bit better. So we don't quite have a great workflow to incorporate them, which is to a great sadness for our team, because this is to a great degree of frustration because we know so many want to help, and it's the hardest thing when we have to turn away people who want to help or turning away people that need help.
No, just wanted to clarify that RNs, they are able to do under Social Psychotherapy Act, they're able to provide psychotherapy. Just wanted to let you know that under a scope of practice. But like me, I have 2 licenses, psychotherapy and a registered nurse. So in this case, I am not candidate for this, so I apologize. I don't think I can fit into this. But I already do help out client in Ukraine people, word of mouth, and I speak the language. So thank you for what you do. Maybe when your practice does grow, and I can always reach out. Thank you.
No, I think for licensed psychotherapists, I think we should have a solution to integrate them pretty soon, because that is also kind of a recognized profession that is a little bit easier for us to navigate. So I'm very hopeful that we can integrate you quite in a short time.
Yeah,
we'll blast it out. As soon as you tell us, we'll blast it out to our community. Kwan, I cut you off, sorry.
Oh, no worries. I was saying, in the meantime, you can feel free to just fill out the volunteer form, and then at least we have your contact And we know that you were interested, and we can ping you again when we have a solution.
I do want to wrap us up in the next 9 minutes to honor Saul and Kwan's time, but Ava?
Thank you. Nice to see you all here again. And I first want to thank you for the wonderful work you are doing. And I really appreciate it. And I think I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm an SCP. And I can imagine how hard it is to put all these things together. And my question is, in our health system, the medical doctor decides to whom a patient should go to. And I can send somebody to a psychotherapy, I can send him to social workers, I can send him to the nurse, I can send him to a body worker, just as I decide what is the best. And is it possible in your system to do this like this?
Yes, absolutely. It's just a matter of getting a patient to that first appointment in some way with anyone. And because the way that it's set up is that usually the first appointment, sometimes they'll have a first contact with a volunteer, and the volunteer can help do a little bit of like, well, but again, our volunteers, our health navigators, are not medical workers. So these are, some of them are high school students, some of them are medical students, some of them are social workers. It's a whole range of people. So we're not asking them to do any triage, because for a lot of them, this is not in their comfort zone. So they might just say, well, sign up for whoever, you know, have the patient look over, these are the options, these are the services, and sign up with someone. But once that first appointment takes place and there's some discussion take place and a little bit of understanding of the needs, that's when that provider can redirect to something that better fits those needs. Great question.
That's your answer.
Mm-hmm.
If we have Ukrainian friends who would be interested, who are providers, do they need to hold one of these 3 licenses, or is that a little bit broader? And I'm assuming can volunteer through.
It might have been my internet, or it might have been Melissa.
Might have been mine. Sorry, I'll repeat it. If we have Ukrainian providers in our network, can they sign up for Telehealth Ukraine and to be providers? And do they need to hold those 3 licenses, or is it a little bit broader for them?
Yeah, I think that would be the same. It would be, they're absolutely welcome to participate. We don't actively advertise it to them or actively recruit them, because a lot of them are struggling just as much as patients are, financially and otherwise, with the facing the consequences of the war. But we do have several, and a lot of them are, a lot of them that are able to do that. They're very committed to help their patient population, and we just kind of help them do all of the administrative stuff that they of course already have clients and patients of their own, but at least then they don't have to do all of the outreach and oral coordination. Then we can take that off their plate. So definitely they're very welcome, and they would also need to hold one of those, at least these 3 that we've discussed so far, licenses. But as sort of basically just the same standard would apply to Ukrainian providers as well.
Kendra, is your hand raised, or? Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. I'm a clinical social worker and an SCP, but I have a couple colleagues that are also licensed clinical social workers. They're not SCPs, but I think they'd be very interested in providing social work, clinical work. Can I connect them?
Yep.
Okay, so this isn't just an SCP thing. You need help.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, everyone, please do pass the word. One of my questions, Saul, was can we share your slides? Can we send them out to our community? Yeah.
Lovely. I'll just send you a version that has the supplementary slides as well,
Okay.
that we didn't get to today, but absolutely, I'll send those over right after.
Thank you. Yeah, we wanted to do a special session today just for the SE community to answer the specific questions that we might have, but please do spread the word to others that share these licenses, because as you've heard, more help is needed. So, all right, we have time for one more question if anyone has or comment. Well, Saul and Kwan, from our community to yours, we are so grateful. We have a tiny understanding through our own efforts to stand up a rapid response to this escalation in the conflict, in the war. Just the sheer amount of work, and it's a labor of love that's gone into setting up what you've accomplished. And we are really excited to see the partnership between your organization and our community hopefully grow over time. So we offer ourselves here to you today. We're here. Please follow up with us. And for everyone in the room, please tell others about this really amazing opportunity to make a difference. So thank you, everyone.